All right. So how did we all do with agreement number one? Great fun? Easy peasy? Made our lives really lovely? I have to tell you, I was speaking with someone who's been in our congregation for a long time. We've studied this book before, and we said, you know, it's up on my refrigerator, and I follow it, and then all of a sudden I kind of go over here and forget about it, and then I come back to it. And that's kind of what all of our tools in our tool belt that Unity teaches, our principles, are that. They're here for us if we focus on them and use them in our lives, and then we can go away from them, come back to them. But they're always here. They are always true. And again, we're studying Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, and we're talking about the second agreement today that Mark read so beautifully. Don't take anything personally. And I have to tell you, this is the hardest one for me. The hardest one for me. I mean, it's not supposed to be. The first one's supposed to be, but really this one's the hardest, because growing up, I was always trying to please people. Please my mom, please my dad, please my teachers. And this feeds right into that. So if my heart is open and I'm loving people, and they say, God, that blue dress looks terrible on you. Well, you shouldn't wear blue. I'm like, really? Let me talk to my mom, you know? Maybe blue's not my color. You know, you missed one of those questions on your exam. You only got a 99. Oh my God, I almost failed, didn't I? Those are the messages. Those are agreements that we have within ourselves. And those agreements, as Mark read this morning, are not just with other people, but they're within that voice within us that keeps telling us and telling us and telling us what very well may be wrong with us. And Don Miguel Ruiz has an explanation for this. I was like, well, why is this happening? And he says that we take it personally because we agree with it. I'm like, really? Really? I agree with it? But what he's saying is we hear something, take it into us, and even though it may be someone else's, as Don Miguel Ruiz calls garbage, we take it in within ourselves, and we believe at least a piece of it. And so what we're doing is we're nourishing ourselves with other people's cast-offs, with other people's trash. And this agreement, if we put it in place, does not solve all of life's problems, but it helps us focus on who and what we are. We are God's on earth. We are whole, complete. We lack in nothing. And when we can focus on that, someone can say something to us and we can just say, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. Let me look at that. But we don't take it to heart and give up everything else that we believe about ourselves. And this really causes us to be trapped in this place, this spiral within ourselves, because we now believe that everything is about me. When we hear something that comes into our life, or we hear something from someone on TV, and we take it to heart, it means that we are the most important person who's hearing that message. And it may not be the case, because we're part of a very large community. And when we say we're the most important person, that everything is because of me, it's a flaw, I believe, in how we approach life. We are always part of a family, we're part of a group, we're part of a community, we're part of a city, we're part of a country, we're part of a world. And when we are more important than that community, it sets us apart. And I believe that's part of what Don Miguel Ruiz is saying here. When we don't take things personally that are said to us, we can be part of a community and say, well, let's talk about that. Let's look at that. What does that mean to you? How can that impact me? What can I do differently? What did I bring to the table that you may be disagreeing with? So I think that it gives us a wonderful chance to really come together as community. Now, Don Miguel Ruiz, as we remember in the past talks about we each live in our own dream. Another way he looks at it is we're each running a movie inside of ourselves. This is my movie of life, and everyone else has a movie of life. And those movies don't always agree. One could be a comedy, one could be a tragedy, one could be a mystery. And we're each seeing the same thing happen through the lens of that movie. And I like to think my movie is pretty happy, But, there are things that happen that make it different. And I've used a few personal stories here this morning, but one thing that just happened recently was I've got a really good girlfriend for 40 years. We talk 5 times a week for 40 years. And she was having a Super Bowl party in February, whenever it was, and I'm not a big football fan. So she's telling me about our menu and all the people that are coming, and I was having a really bad day at work. All I wanted for her was to say, Jeannine, it'll be okay. But all she wanted to do was tell me about her menu. And so finally I just said, I don't want to hear about this, and I hung up on her. Because I wasn't getting what I needed, just some kindness, just it'll be okay. And she wasn't getting what she needed from me, adulation about her wonderful menu. So anyway, what's really sad is we've not spoken in 5 months. It's a real tragedy in my life, and I need to solve it. This lesson brings this forward for me. I need to solve this. A 40-year friend, and I'd give up over a stupid football game? I mean, it's crazy. But these are the things that happen. These are those agreements that we make with life. I wanted something, and I couldn't verbalize it to her. And so she just kept running her movie and being excited about her life, and I couldn't relate to it. So those are the pieces that when we don't take things personally, I should have been able to say, hey, I got to run. Let me call you back later. Didn't do that. And those are those tragedies that we do because of these agreements we have within ourselves and our own movie playing that doesn't necessarily agree with someone else's movie. We assume that they know what's going on in our life. And after 40 years, I would assume that. But really, moment by moment, we don't when we live hundreds of miles apart. Now, if we take things personally, what happens is we become part of their movie, part of their world. And as Don Miguel says, they give us their garbage or their leftovers to put into our world. But by using this agreement to not take anything personally, we become more immune to those kind of situations. And it's really fascinating that when we can stop and say, gosh, tell me more about that. Gosh, tell me where you're coming from. How can I help you? Instead of reacting personally like it's an insult to ourselves. And I think in conjunction with, Don Miguel's first principle, or his first agreement, this one, and the other two flow just right after that, we can, again, have these sitting on our refrigerator, on our desk, and come back to them every day and look at them and really see a change that we can make. Because immunity from these kind of insults is really the gift that this second agreement gives us. Unfortunately, what happens if we don't use this second agreement is we end up going down the rabbit hole. Gosh, are they right about me? Are they clairvoyant? Do they really know what's going on? Did they really see that flaw that I failed way back then? And it's got to be true. And we go down a rabbit hole, and we end up in this really terrible place, really our mini version of living in hell instead of living in the kingdom of heaven, which is our inheritance. And again, by using our word that we talked about last week, our word, the Christ, in everything that we interact with, we create the kingdom of heaven in this place. And as we've said before, the kingdom of hell and the kingdom of heaven are the same place. It's all in how we look at it and what movie we're running within ourselves and what truths we're living within ourselves. So I think it's a really, really wonderful, wonderful, small agreement that we can make within our lives. Because now we can say, I know who I am. I know what I am. I know that I'm whole and perfect. And I know that I live as love in this world. So when we can know that, even if someone yells at us or someone says something unkind or someone runs up to our car and starts hitting our car because they think we almost hit them in the street, whatever happens, we can at least take that moment, be in the now, be in this moment and say, okay, let me figure this out, let's look at it, and not just take it negatively that someone is doing something to us. Now, I've told you about my dad and how wonderful he is. There's a really wonderful story about something that happened in my childhood that really talks about this. And when I was 14, I was raised in the Lutheran Church, and all the good Luther Leaguers got to go to Manhattan for an international Luther League convention. You can imagine thousands of little 14, 15-year-olds running around Manhattan in the latter 60s. I mean, it was an event. So 5 churches got together. We all got a bus, and we drove out we went to Williamsburg, we went to Niagara Falls, and we went to Manhattan. You can imagine. So we're staying 4 girls per room in the Commodore Hotel, which doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down to make Trump Towers. So we're staying at the Commodore Hotel, no air conditioning, windows open in the middle of summer, and we're just loving it. And so here I am wandering around Manhattan, and in the 60s, I don't know if any of you remember what Manhattan was like. There were people living in boxes in Central Park. There was all kinds of crime and theft. One of the guys in my group actually had somebody do that thing where they say, oh, there's somebody around the corner, give me your money and I'll meet you over there and give it back to you. That happened to him. Lost everything. Another young man in my group actually killed himself. These are all lessons that as a 14-year-old I learned. I saw people living out of boxes. I saw people begging. I saw wonderful things as well, but so I get back on the bus after this is over, drive up to Niagara Falls, drive back to Wisconsin, and got home Saturday. And so Sunday, I was supposed to get in front of the congregation and thank them for sending us to New York. So my dad asked me, well, what are you going to say? So I told him this whole story. I'm going to talk about the people living in the boxes and what was happening in New York and the theft and how, how we can all have an impact in this and make the world a better place. And my dad, a wonderful man, said, Jeannine, if you say one word about that, you are no longer my daughter. I was 14. I will tell you that I went to church that day, sang in the choir, and was supposed to get up in front of everyone, and I was debating in my mind, what do I do, what do I do, what do I do? And I got up and I said, it was a wonderful trip. Thank you so much for sending us. We all enjoyed it. But it was at that moment that I made an agreement with myself when I was 14 that the Christian church meant nothing. That was the moment that I left. And it was 40 plus years till I discovered unity and started to open a window that said, well, maybe it's not so bad. 40 years of a really agreement based in a huge pain. And those are those agreements that we're asking that you bring forward into the light, that we no longer shove down inside of us and say, oh, well, it's okay. These techniques mean that we can bring something forward into the light of love and solve them. Let them go, forgive them, and move on. And that story means a lot to me. I have really not shared it a lot with people, but when I think about defining moments in my life, within a religious standing, that one really defined my life, because when I went through catechism class a few years earlier, do you know what I wanted to be? I wanted to be a minister. I know you can't believe that, but I wanted to be a minister. And so my minister said, oh, girls don't become ministers. I'm like, really? Really? Girls don't become ministers? That world is now gone. But when I was 12 years old and going through catechism, that was what I was told, that I couldn't be a minister. And those are the pieces that, as we can bring all of these hurts, these hurtful agreements out and work to solve them, that our lives change. And as Don Miguel said in the first agreement, we get some of that power back, that power that's been holding us back, that power, that pain. We get that power back. And so I think that's the whole crux of what Don Miguel really talks about here. And I guess the other thing that he talked a little bit about was that, do all of your agreements within yourself agree? Mine don't. So I've got an agreement over here that I'm going to stop eating sugar. I've got an agreement over here that I reward myself with sugar. And so I've got these 2 agreements, and it's like, okay, well, which one's going to win? And it's like the old story of, the 2 wolf cubs, fighting it out, and who's going to win? It's the one that you feed. It's the one that you support. And I'm hoping I'm going to support letting sugar go, but it's still a little bit of a battle. Now, as I've shared with you before, there is a darker side to Don Miguel's these principles. There's a darker side to all spiritual principles. And it's called spiritual bypassing. And there's a lot been written about it. And what it is taking a spiritual principle and disassociating yourself from the truth. So if I use the story of my friend Barb, and I now made her impersonal, I've disassociated myself from her, I have depersonalized her, and I've disconnected from her. And so the dark side of using this technique is that if we go that route and build this wall around ourselves, keep pushing our pain down, we will never let go of those agreements that are based in pain and fear. So the darker side, the spiritual bypassing side, is that we totally step away from the challenge, disassociate ourselves, set ourselves up over here, and say, oh, that really doesn't exist anymore. And that is not what unity is about. That's not what these 4 principles are about. What these principles are about and what we teach is that these painful agreements that we have within ourselves need to be brought into the light. They'll create some heat, as I said last week. The light of God is going to create some heat to help us solve these challenges. But when we bring them forward, we are able to forgive them, let them go, let them fly away wherever else they can go, and they don't define who and what we are any longer. So I believe really strongly in what we teach here at Unity. I believe really strongly in these 4 principles. But please know that we can go astray sometimes. And I'd ask us all just to remember who and what we are. We are God incarnate on this earth plane. We are whole, perfect, kind, joyful. And that is the truth of who we are. And when we can bring those painful agreements out, and maybe it's through journaling, maybe it's through a conversation with a friend, maybe it's through working with a spiritual counselor or a psychologist, but in a way to bring things forward. Get them solved, let them go, get your power back, and live as the joy of God on this earth plane. I'd like to ask our wonderful music team to come back up. Robert Augustus Masters is who wrote about spiritual bypassing. And what he said in his book was, when we do not immunize against pain, we're just open. It does not draw us away from our humanity, but into its heartland. And that's really what we're asking here. Don't step away from our humanity, but bring our challenges into that heartland, into our heart space. Solve them and know that we are love and all is well. Thank you so much. It's been my joy to talk with you this morning. Thank you. Thank you.